77 years ago, August 25th, 1939, a 16-year-old girl by the name of Frances Gumm appears on movie screens across America. And in those moments, she changes the course of cinematic history. Now you're probably thinking, who is this girl and what have I missed? But of course her name that you're more familiar with is Judy Garland. And the movie, of course, is Wizard of Oz. 77 years ago. It's hard to believe. Still looks pretty good. And in the time that that movie was made, it really wasn't that well received by the public. Critically, it was. It was nominated for many Oscars, including Best Picture. It lost out to Gone with the Wind. Tough year to be nominated for Best Picture. But at the time, people weren't very interested in this fantastical story about this girl named Dorothy. But in the years since, that's changed, hasn't it? In the 50s, it was shown on television for the first time, and it's been on TV every year since. And it's got so much popularity now that the Library of Congress estimates it's the most watched movie of all time. People love it. People go nuts for this stuff. And probably some of you in here today really love it too. But I must confess to you this morning, I'm not one of them. No insult or offense to anyone. It's just not my bag. I don't really get it. Maybe it was the flying monkeys when I was a kid scared me. I don't know. But I have been turned off from this movie ever since. But really, when you strip away all of the sort of mystical, fanatical, fantastical characters and creatures in the story, it's really ultimately very simple, isn't it? It's just about a girl who wants to get home. That's ultimately the story. It's purely about Dorothy's journey to find her way back home. Now that I can relate to, because the idea of missing home is one that I think we've all felt before. Even if you're just traveling. If you're just out of town for a little while. I know that if I get past more than a week of vacation, I start to miss home. Especially if you've ever traveled internationally, you really start to miss home. But maybe nowhere stronger than if you've moved. You know, when you move away from the place that you grew up, there's always something special about home, isn't there? We moved away from Port Huron when I was 12. I haven't lived there in over 20 years, but every time that I get on a certain stretch of 94, it just feels like home. We can't really understand what this idea of home is. We don't really know what it means because it's more than just the house, right? Because for many people, it's not a house. It might be an apartment. For millennials, home might be your parents' basement. Home is more than just the structure. It's a feeling. It's an emotion. It's a comfort. It's a security. It's something we just can't quite put our finger on, but we try to figure out what is home. And maybe we can't really describe what it is and we can't really put into words, but we know what it feels like when we're not there. Is that true? We know what home is. We know what home feels like, even if we can't figure out exactly the words to describe it. The comfort, the security of home. And you know, I've always been fascinated really, by those people who seem like they can just move away from home at the drop of a hat. You know, you watch television shows like House Hunters, and you see these people who have moved from Australia to New Jersey. Or you see the reverse sometimes. You'll see people who move from Ohio to Jamaica just because it sounded cool. I'm not like that at all. I don't understand that mentality. Maybe you guys are out there are like that and they're different from me. I'm fascinated by that because for me, I just feel this strong connection to the security of home. But some people aren't like that. Some people can leave everything they know, their job, their family, their friends, and go on an adventure. I'm fascinated by those people. Which makes me that much more interested in what happens in Matthew chapter 4. Because in Matthew 4, we're introduced to these guys called the apostles. But really, they're just men who follow Jesus, specifically called and dedicated their lives to him. And we sort of gloss over in Matthew chapter 4 where we call Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and we see Jesus appear to them while they're fishing, and he says, "Follow me," and they get up and they follow him, and then we go on with the rest of the gospel. But have you thought what it meant to be those guys in that position? That here they are out at their job, just going about their day, and this man comes along who says, "Follow me," and they do. And everything that they left behind. Like in 22, it tells us that they leave not just their boats, which is their livelihood, but they leave their family. Have you ever thought about that? That at once these apostles get up, they say, "Whatever is behind me, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to follow this guy." These apostles just leave home like that. Why? Have you ever asked that question? What would compel them to do this? Now, we, of course, have the opportunity to have hindsight, and we look back and we see the gospel and go, well, they're out following Jesus, obviously. But put yourself in their shoes. At that moment, they don't realize Jesus is the Son of God. In fact, for some of them, it's going to take the whole ministry for them to get it, and then maybe not even then. They don't realize that this is the person who is going to change the world forever. They don't get that at that moment. At that moment, they make a decision to leave everything they knew at home to follow him. Why? Now, at this point, we have to speculate a bit, and it's based on my study of Scripture, but understand that this isn't gospel. This just comes from my brain. I think what they saw in Jesus was home. I think what they saw in him was the comfort and security of home, so much so that it caused them and allowed them to leave what was behind. What was their home? What was everything they knew? To follow him. Now, over those 3 years, you think about this, Jesus and the apostles didn't have a home to go to. It actually, Jesus tells us that himself in Matthew 8. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head. They're not going to have a physical home for those 3 years. Every place they sleep, every place they eat is going to be different every day. They don't have a home. And yet I believe personally, those apostles could not have been more at home when they were with Jesus. They left everything behind to follow this man because he was the home to them. And it's in that mentality, it's the way we have to look at that through their eyes that we can understand or hope to understand John chapter 13. Because in John chapter 13, we see Jesus in this conversation with the apostles that's going to truly blow their minds. It's going to disrupt them. It's going to shake them out of this security and comfort. Now, here's the context of this. We're at the Last Supper, as we would call it, but really it's just Passover for the guys who are experiencing this. Jesus has washed the feet of the apostles and has shown them what it means to be a servant. The next day, Jesus is going to be arrested, but they don't know that yet. He does. And he says to them something incredibly startling. He says, in verse 33, "Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come." Now, you've probably read this before, and you get to this point, and you know what's coming next, especially Bible scholars. You're already ahead of me. But think about this in context of what the apostles are going through. 3 years they have spent essentially every moment with this man. He has become their family, their home, their leader, everything that has been comfortable and secure to them, right? And then after this moment of foot washing, of serving, of sharing this meal, he says to them, "Okay, guys, I'm going to go somewhere, and you can't come with me." This is startling. This is disheartening. This is confusing. This doesn't make any sense. Everywhere else we've gotten to go with you, but now you say, "Where I'm going, you can't come." And that's exactly what Peter says. He says, "Lord, where are you going?" Remember, these are human beings. Sometimes we think, "Oh, it's Peter. Oh, Peter." Like the big statues in the Vatican. Peter. Peter's just a guy. Peter's just a man who has feelings and emotions like you do. And so when his Jesus, his home, says to him, "You can't come," Peter says, "Where are you going? Where possibly could you go that I couldn't follow?" Now, what follows from there is a discourse between Jesus and Peter about his upcoming denial. That's saved for another lesson. But this is the question we're looking to answer. Lord, where are you going? And you have to jump to John 14 to find out the answer. Now, this is where I don't like the chapter and verses, right? Because this is the same dialogue. We've broken it up here for convenience sake, but don't miss the fact that this is an answer to the question that Peter is asking. Lord, where are you going? And this is what he says. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you so. For I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way I am going. What does Jesus say to them? How does he answer this question? Lord, where are you going? He comforts them by telling him, I'm going to prepare a home for you. Now, the apostles, obviously, as human beings, have a difficult time understanding this, as we're going to see in a moment. But he's answering their question by saying, I'm going to prepare a home for you. And what he's teaching them and telling them is just what we sing in our songs. This world is not our home. Jesus is saying, I'm going to go prepare a home for you because that's your home, not this place. Now, fortunately, the apostles are going to get this idea. They're going to get it later. But they're going to write things, Peter especially, will write things like this. He'll call us as strangers or aliens. This world's not our home. Paul will echo the same thing in Philippians, where he calls us citizens of heaven. This world's not our home. But Jesus is telling them this concept way before these men will write these letters. He's telling them here, on the night that he is about to depart from them and be arrested and change the world forever, I'm going to prepare a home for you. It's a beautiful and wonderful thing for a father in Jesus, this father figure to these men who has been their comfort and security, to say to them, I have to leave, but it's for your own good. You can't go with me because I'm going to prepare an ultimate home for you. This world's not your home. But did you notice at the end of what Jesus says is that you know the way there? Now again, putting ourselves in the context of these human beings, and if somebody said these phrases to you and have walked through the progression that we've walked through, and then says, and then you know the way, you're probably going to be a little confused. Because you don't know where he's going. And the last time I checked, if I don't know where I am going, or where I'm supposed to go to, it's very difficult for me to get there. And so they ask this question very clearly, very plainly to us. Lord, we don't know where you're going. How do we know the way? Now, if you have your Bibles open, you recognize who said that. It's Thomas. Thomas gets a bad rap, right? He just does. You can't even think about Thomas without thinking about doubting, right? That's a bad rap. It really is. Because I got to admit, I'm going to be right there with Thomas, right? I have questions. I want answers. And Thomas says it here, exactly what we're thinking. We don't know where you're going. How do we know the way there? What are the apostles missing? They're missing the fact that Jesus is talking about spiritual things and they're thinking about physical things, right? Not that that ever happens to us. But the apostles are doing that. They're thinking physical. They're thinking Jesus is going to a physical place to prepare a physical place for them. And so when he says, you know the way, they say, we don't know where you're going. How do we know the way? It's a very honest human question. But Jesus answers them in a beautifully spiritual way. He's going to give them directions. But it's not going to be go down at the light, take a right, head down to the cul-de-sac. It's the third house on the right. He didn't say that, does he? Now you know this one. You know how he's going to answer this, don't you? Somebody? Anybody? All right, here's your help. He's going to give them the directions, and it's going to sound like this. He's going to say that I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Now remember how we built this up. We're looking for that home that Jesus is preparing. The apostles are looking for a physical place, ultimately, and they don't know how to get there. But Jesus is talking about a spiritual home in heaven. And he says, here's the directions. I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. Nobody's going to get there but through me. Jesus gives you directions on how to get to the home in heaven. But what do they mean? What does he mean when he says this? What is this path that he tells us to take? But we better break that down for just a moment here this morning. He says that he's the way. What does it mean to be the way? The article here, the, is very important because it means only. He doesn't say a way. He says the way. That's not by accident. Jesus says, I am the way. Now, the word way here in English probably has a lot of different meanings to us, but truly it means route. It means path. Jesus says that I am the path that you're looking for, Thomas. I am the path that you are looking for, people. The path home. Now, we're going to see writers write later in Acts that Jesus is the salvation through nobody else. The apostles are going to confirm this through many of their letters and their writings, that Jesus is the way. But at this moment, they're not grasping that in the full context of what it is, just like we may not. What Jesus is saying, if we can shortcut it for our brains, is follow me. He's saying, I'm the path. Follow me. Now, what does that mean? It means everything that he's taught. It means follow his commandments. It means emulate him. Be the example that he is. Follow me. I'm the way. Now, if I'm receiving directions from somebody, that's a very comforting thought to say, this is the way. I am it. But that doesn't mean anything if he doesn't follow it up with the truth. You see, the truth is very, very important. Because what's the opposite of truth? Right. So if you're receiving these directions from Jesus, it's going to be very important that he's telling you the right thing, right? That he's telling you the truth. But now notice here that Jesus doesn't say to his apostles, I'm speaking truth, right? I am the way, I speak truth. He doesn't say that. Because if he did, it would have a totally different meaning. Because everybody in this room at one time or another has spoke truth, yes? I hope so. At least some percentage of the time. It's different to speak truth than to be truth. Now, how can this be? How can Jesus say that he is the truth? Well, we have to do a little detective work, and we have to go all the way back to the Old Testament, where we see in 1 Samuel that he writes, and your law, talking about God, is truth. God's law is truth. Then Jesus will pray to God in John and say that your word, again God, your word is truth. But now what is Jesus going to have written about him in the first chapter of John? That he is the Word. So God's law is truth. His Word is truth. Jesus is the Word. Well, then here we have our conclusion. Jesus says, if you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you will know the truth. Now, what's the rest of that? And the truth will set you free. Yeah, that's bonus points for the scholars. Jesus says, I am the truth. How do we get to that conclusion? We get to that conclusion because God's word is truth, Jesus is the word, and then by knowing him, we can know the truth. Jesus says, I am the way. I am the truth. Now, we have to go to the third point, where Jesus says, I'm the life. And I have to stop at this moment and say, if Jesus doesn't talk about point 3 here, then points 1 and 2 really don't matter. Jesus can be the way, he can be the truth, but if he's not the life, then we all should just go home. Because that's the ultimate home that we're looking for, is one that brings life. And Jesus tells his apostles that, as well as us as Christians, in John 14. Just a little bit later down in the chapter, he reminds them that because I live, you will live. See, Jesus is the way. He is the way, the path. He is the truth, embodied it, not just speaking it, but he himself. And then he himself is life. How? Because he lives, we can live. He is the life. 1 Corinthians maybe sums it up better than any place on this topic. Because it phrases it as these questions, these quotes that Paul writes to say, because of Jesus, we have victory over death. Because of Jesus, we have life. And in this beautiful, simple answer to this question that really the apostles are looking for, physical directions, tell me how to get to this place you are, Jesus says it's not about the physical, it's about the spiritual, and the answer to your question is me. I am everything that you need to get to this home that I'm preparing for you. I'm the way. And I'm the way that you can believe because I'm the truth. And because you believe in the truth that I am, then you have the life. Now put yourself in these human brains. These are fishermen. These aren't scholars of the law. These aren't brilliant men any different than you and I. And they see this man that they love that has become their comfort, their security, and he's leaving them and they don't understand it. And he answers them like this, mind blown. Because what Jesus is talking about is way more than 4 walls, some windows, and a roof. He is talking about the eternal, forever home and the way to get there. And nobody gets to get there but through him. So he leaves the apostles and us with these very interesting directions. And I think about directions in our lives. If I were to ask you a very simple question this morning, how do you get to Cedar Point? I bet I would have 100 different answers, right? If you've ever gone to Cedar Point or you've ever asked somebody, what's the best way to get down there? You'll get a different response every time. Am I not telling the truth? Yes. Because you'll have people who will say, oh, no. This is the fastest way. I'll tell you the fastest way. Oh, no. You want to avoid the toll roads, right? So don't take the toll road because this is a better way. Or this is the shortest distance and there's always construction and you want to take this way. There's a different route every time, right? And that's the way it is with directions. If I ask you a direction someplace, you're going to give me your personal opinion on how to get to that spot. You know this in life, right? That's why men, we don't ask for directions. We know they're going to be wrong. True? But even if you ask your GPS, she's going to give you 3 different ways. See, directions come from all over the place, and they're varied based on people's individual opinion. And so here we have this spot that we want to get to. We have this road to the house, the home that God has built for us, and Jesus says this is the way to get there. But just like everything else in our lives, we're going to come up with other ideas on how to get there, even when we're talking about our home in heaven. Because that's what we as people do. Jesus says, I'm the way, this is the right way, follow me, follow me, follow me. But our little brains get involved and go, I bet there's a shortcut. I think there's probably another way. I don't know if I want to go down that path. And we come up with our own versions of these directions. Am I telling the truth? We do. We live in a whole world full of people who are going different directions when Jesus says this is the way. Now watch the beauty of this, because this has already been considered in this amazing book you hold in your hands. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 14. It's a famous verse that you probably already know without realizing you know it. There is a way which seems right to a man, but the end is the way of death. Heard that before? Mm-hmm. Have you ever realized that it is a perfect symmetry to what Jesus just told us? He says in Proverbs, there's a way. Jesus says, I am the way. Proverbs says, that seems right. Jesus says, I'm the truth. Proverbs tells us that way leads to death, and Jesus says, I'm the life. You ever realize these match up pretty well? So the question becomes for you, which road do you want to take? Do you want to take the one that's a way or the way? Do you like that phrase, seems right? Doesn't that just sum up humans? Seems right to me, right? You want your mechanic to say that, don't you? Seems right. Seems right. You see, Jesus understands this is the mentality that we approach. I got a way, seems pretty good to me, but what does that lead us to? And so he says, forget about that, guys. Forget about these other directions that you've been told. Forget about the way that your brain has thought, and just simply listen to what I'm saying to you. You want to go home with me? Here's the way. It's me. I'm the way. I'm the truth. I'm the life. Which road would you take? Now, presented like this in this format and scenario, it's intended for you to, maybe not physically, but smack yourself in the forehead. Oh, duh, which way would I take? If it were that easy, we'd have 10,000 people in here and the world wouldn't be going the way they're going, right? So as much as we know this, as much as we can read this and think that, yeah, of course, why would we do anything else? We still stumble and trip and fall. And the world does too. We know the way home. It's really not that difficult. It's difficult in its execution sometimes because we come up against choices that we don't like to make or want to make. But if we truly allowed ourselves to be the disciples that Christ calls us to be, then it's really simple. It's follow him to get home. We all want to go home. Some of you right now literally want to go home, but just hang with me a few more minutes. But the world just wants to go home. We all want to go home. We all want to go someplace that's comfortable. We want to go someplace that's secure. We want to go home. You ever seen this guy before? He's dashing. I'm going to take my next picture for the wall like that. You see, before The Wizard of Oz was a movie, it was a book. A book written by Frank Baum. Now, Frank Baum grew up in Syracuse, and he was 12, when he was 12, in 1868. He was sent off to military academy. Just a little ways down the river from his home. He spent 2 years at this military academy in Peekskill, New York. And he wrote in letters that it was the most miserable experience of his life. A 12-year-old sent away to an academy. Could be rough. He was so homesick and the people were so cruel there that he was absolutely despondent. And he'd look out the windows of the academy, and he would see the dock where the steamboats would come in. And he knew that that's the boats that could take him back home. But you know what was between him and that dock where the boat could take him home? Was this. A road made of Dutch clay. The original yellow brick road. This is all that remains of it. But you can go visit this in New York. Because Frank Baum looked out his window and he thought, if I could just get down that path and get to that boat, then I could get home. And 30 years later, he'd write a story about a girl named Dorothy who wanted to do just that. We're all trying to go home. Because that's a place that we just feel inside our soul. This world just doesn't feel right to us, does it? There's something just off about this place because we are not citizens of here, we're citizens of heaven. And that's what Paul will write about later in 2 Corinthians. Read this along with me. For we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in heaven. For indeed, in this house we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven. Therefore, being always of good courage, and knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord, for we walk by faith, not by sight. We are of good courage, I say, and prefer rather to be absent from the body and to be what? Home with the Lord. You see, we're not home right now. We long to be in that place that God has prepared us for. But the thing that separates us from that is a path. Ours isn't yellow. Well, maybe for some of us, but that'd be strange. Our path is God. Our path is His Son. Our path is the way. Dorothy says, there's no place like home. And I say that as Christians today. There's no place like our home in heaven. Are you willing to do what it takes to walk the path to get there? Are you willing to go through the trials, through the temptations, through the difficulties, to find your way home? I hope you are. I pray you are. So that we can have the wonderful, beautiful reunion together in heaven. If you're here this morning and you have not started your way on this journey, we want to study with you because it starts with faith. It starts with belief. It starts in the waters of baptism, but then the steps begin to live the life as Jesus calls. But many of us here have been through that. Many of us here have started on the path, but we have gotten, well, maybe a little lost, wandered a little stray, taken a nap in the poppies. I've seen the movie. Just because I don't like it, I've seen it, though. Maybe we've gotten caught up with the traps and the trials of our lives. We have an opportunity every morning that God gives us breath to dedicate our lives to Him anew. And today is no different for that. If we can be a support system to you and for you, this is an opportunity to do so. If we can help you in any way, don't hesitate as we stand and sing.